Hi, I am Izzy Fenwick and I am very excited to be bringing you a new podcast series from the Aotearoa Circle called The Circle We Keep. So follow along while I talk to public and private leaders about New Zealand's natural capital and future prosperity for the country. Follow along, join, subscribe, send me a carrier pigeon with questions if you have any, and I look forward to seeing you there. Hi and welcome to The Circle We Keep, a new podcast series from the Aotearoa Circle. We have a very special guest today, Grant Webster from THL, CEO of Tourism Holdings Limited. I know Grant and I'm expecting him to probably ask me as many questions as I ask him. So let's bring him in. Enjoy. The last time we were like this, which was maybe sort of a month or so ago, you were interviewing me.
Yeah.
So it's quite nice to have the tables turned today. So thank you for agreeing to come and have a conversation with me.
Oh, no, absolute pleasure. And I'm not sure that the table will completely turn. I think there's some things that I still want to ask you as well.
Oh, I love that. Spicy.
Yeah, we'll see what happens.
Yeah, good. We're obviously going to be talking a lot about nature and the environment today. So I'm keen to understand, you know, what were the conversations about nature or the environment or sustainability like 20 years ago, other than, isn't it beautiful? And this is the most beautiful place, you know, in the world. Yeah. Were there many other, you know, conversations about nature or the environment or sustainability back then?
Yeah, well, it was definitely different. So not the conversations that we have today, not the conversations that we had 10 or 15 years ago, really. So 20 plus years ago, when THL then we had Kelly Tarletons. So, you know, we were worried about the penguins. We were doing a lot of conservation work with sharks and turtles and, you know, a lot of that. So there was a lot of that kind of conversation in Waitomo with the glowworm caves. There was a lot of conversation about protecting the environment there, water levels, looking after the karst environment and the glowworms and everything else. So there was those kind of, I guess what I'd call practical product-related conversations. The broader impact on nature and the environment, not so much. That was definitely a journey that continued and it all moved into that. But the interesting thing when I think about that, and there's been research on this around the world, when you look at tourism and what conservation, what sustainability means, it's very, very much a product of your environment, right? When Tourism New Zealand did some research on this, and we were part of that a few years ago. In fact, there was a piece of it just before COVID and rechecked after COVID. What's happening around the world? What do different people think, flight shaming and everything else? And what came out of that is just the question of sustainability is very different depending on where you are. You know, India is about how do we survive today, tomorrow, how do we get water and food, as it was at the time. Different places will be about electricity and that's what
Makes sense.
Sustainable conversation is. For us, it's very different.
I think tourism is quite a good example of beginning to see, like even the example that you gave, you can see how the desire to keep the glowworms and the Waitomo caves and the things that bring people, desire to protect them because they're practical, as the seeds for what we're beginning to understand more of now. And I think that's really interesting. And yeah, it makes, I think, the tourism industry a great one to talk about when it comes to natural capital or nature as a supplier. She is without a doubt one of your most critical suppliers for your industry. How do you think about nature as a supplier or natural capital? What does that mean for you?
Yeah, so I want to come back to some of your views on it because I think you've got some really fascinating views and you articulate it really well. For me, I think one of the journey points for us was actually through Waitomo and through the local hapu. And as we well know, te ao Māori concepts are so embedded in this whole conservation conversation. And those Māori concepts are very real. And we just learnt a lot. So back in 2005 even, there was a fire at Waitomo Glowworm Caves that burnt down the visitor centre. So we had a whole rebuild conversation with the owners about the future. And there was a very key lesson then from one of the owners, which was, hey, when we're looking at this, you might be here in 5 years, Grant, you might be here in 10 years. We're thinking about 100, 200 years, and that's the way we're thinking about all of this, and you need to move your frame of reference to that as well. Big lesson.
Wow.
Really key lesson. And so we've learnt so much from that. During the COVID period, one of the kaumātua was very, very clear about talking to us about nature has responded to the way that we've been treating the environment, and we need to listen, we need to learn, and we need to do some things differently. So really, I think that natural capital, that conversation there very much relates with those Te Ao Māori concepts, with the concept of mauri and that balance. And if you get that out of balance, it will have an impact. In a more descriptive manner, I think you've talked about the balance sheet concept, right? And I think that really resonates, and it makes a lot of sense, Is it any different to a factory that needs capital employed to produce something, and you've got to have repairs and maintenance, and you've got to invest in that factory, and if you don't invest in that factory, it's going to become derelict, and it's going to become useless. Is it any different to that? No.
No, I don't think so, no.
So why do we think about those kind of physical man-made assets and strategic assets differently to the natural strategic assets? We shouldn't. We shouldn't.
And I can totally see from a human psychological or a behavioural way, I can see how we got to a point where we haven't. And like you say, this is something I've been talking about a bit, and I think, one of the concepts in that is because she's been our supplier since the very beginning, we didn't really notice. She was just always there. We didn't do the due diligence, and we didn't check her stocks, and so I can totally see how we missed that trick. But we have got to a point now where I think we know too much not to be able to see the very tangible economic asset that she is, or the benefits that she provides us. And again, I think the tourism industry is such a great way to start to really quantify that, because for you, those glowworms are a asset and an ecosystem service. And if you had to make them by hand, like what would that look like? So how does THL and Waitomo is a great example, because I know they're doing some amazing stuff. How do you as a leader and THL think about that relationship with nature and the assets and services that she provides as such a key part of your commercial business?
Yeah. So we tried a number of years ago to actually start to take a commercial lens to that. So we worked with a number of the hapu and Dr. Daniel Aotearoa. But Daniel did some work, he's at AUT, and he did some work on modelling of mauri.
Cool.
So we actually now, every month, we measure what we believe is the mauri. So ultimately, there's a huge level of subjectivity in it.
Of course.
But the fact that you're actually assessing and thinking about the different aspects and whether we've decreased or increased the mauri and the reasons why, and then that creates a, so what are we going to do? So we're thinking about it every month. And just as we review the P&L, we review the mauri of Waitomo.
Wow.
So that's a lot of what it's about. And within that, you then start to look more strategically at particular points. We've looked at how many people go through the caves. We've looked at reducing those numbers in peak periods and spreading it out so that the CO2 levels are more manageable, not causing as much lamp and flora and so forth and so on, So you look at it systemically on that basis. We look at what's happening with the waterways and how we can protect those to a greater degree. Predator fencing and how we can improve from that perspective. And it's not just ticking boxes, it's when you actually assess what's happening, measure it, and create an action plan. And that's probably the key.
A couple of things I want to pick up on that. One is I really want to acknowledge and appreciate that you said some of this is subjective, that the measuring of the Māori is incredibly and actually nearly impossible, really, because there is no measurement frameworks for that kind of thing. And I do think that can be a real barrier for a lot of corporate minds. Totally, that if we can't really measure it, we shouldn't even touch it, kind of. And if we don't totally know, how can we? So I so appreciate not only that you're doing it, but that you're openly talking about doing it when it is A, very hard and yet B, nearly impossible to measure.
So let's sidetrack there on your views on CRDs, right? Climate-related disclosures. And there's obviously an announcement about changing the requirements around all of that. And it did, from a business, a public listed CE and business perspective, it did get very onerous. And the level of, I guess, accountability that sat with it, you can understand from one perspective, but my view is it had terrible unintended consequences, and that it exactly what you're talking about, a conversation of something that could have a legal liability for someone because it wasn't really clearly measurable and definable and couldn't be tested in a certain way. It just pulled everybody back. What did you see? What did you think around that whole CRD process and what happened?
I thought whether we report on it or not, the things that it was trying to potentially do would be true either way. So, whether you report on emissions or the environment or not, the environment doesn't stop, doing those things. So I definitely agree that the parts of it that were the effort was high and the impact was potentially low is really unhelpful.
Yeah.
But I also think that thinking, if we don't have to report on it,
we won't do anything.
Yeah, it's kind of like if a tree falls in the forest, do you still hear it? Yeah, it sort of definitely does. So, and I think, it's complicated, and it sort of depends why you're doing it and what you need to do. But if there are material risks or implications on certain things, those things are still true whether you report on them or not.
Yeah.
But progress over process, I do think is always better.
And that's that really interesting loop, right? And I remember a very clear conversation with Jonathan Burrow, and he was, this was a number of years ago before the CRDs were a requirement, really pushing, saying you've got to have a real goal on your Scope 3 emissions. And that was where it was starting the conversation to go, hey, look, you're going to be held accountable to these, you've got to set them. And if you're not setting them, you're not being ambitious. We had this real debate because there's this the ambition, great, I'm all for it. Look back at some of our statements, 2016, 17, 18, 19, all for it. And the drive to make those changes there, when you start being told, you've got to be held accountable to it 100%, then you have to go with what is known. And when you go with what is known, your ambition is absolutely brought back.
It's so true.
Because you've got to be so defined in what you're doing, and you're going to be held accountable to that definition. Now, I completely understand that there was lots of people that were just getting on a bandwagon and just saying, how many companies around the world were just saying, we're going to be carbon neutral by X date with no clear plan. So that needed to be brought into line, without a doubt. But we've really pulled back on ambition.
Yeah, I agree. And I think it gets even more complicated when we talk about nature, not just emissions. It's even harder.
100%.
Harder to measure that. It'll be an interesting and massive challenge to think about how organisations are going to start thinking about measuring and managing their impact on nature when that's even more complicated to kind of quantify. In saying that, I did see recently that the World Bank found a way to quantify the ecosystem services, the global ecosystem services, and quantified it at $179 trillion US, which is greater than the world's GDP. And I thought, so we are starting to get the frameworks that we're going to need to kind of look at that kind of thing. And I talk about those ecosystem services a lot, and thinking about even, those glowworms. If you had to create the ecosystem service you get from that, would be very expensive.
Yeah, and it would lack authenticity and all the other bits and pieces, right? So, so you're right. We've got to look after it. We've got to look more deeply, and I think in New Zealand tourism, people are. The desire's there. the awareness is really getting there. So now we've got to make sure that we are getting that. What are the steps? What are the deliberate actions that we need to take, and how do we make that clear as an industry? So Coalition of the Willing is now a lot larger than what it was 7 or 8 years ago. There's really good responses in the tourism industry. Aotearoa survey about how many tourism businesses are engaged with, want to contribute to a better natural environment, and are monitoring what they're doing. But we've just got to get those bigger steps in place.
Awesome. And I think, like we've touched on already a little bit, that when you can really see how nature is providing a service or an asset like tourism does, it does become a little bit easier to connect with it. So the tourism industry does have that going for it. I know you were involved in the Aotearoa Circle's scenario work. I know it was a little while ago, so I won't expect you to remember exactly all of the details.
Yeah.
But a big part of what we're trying to do with this podcast is really create a little bit more accessibility or understanding about some of the work that is trying to be done in the space as you've described it. So from your perspective, how would you describe even the concept of doing scenarios for the tourism industry as simply as you can?
Yeah. So look, I think the co-chairs, Larissa and Takampeni, did an amazing job. They put in so much work around all of that. And again, that really deeply weaved in Te Ao Māori into the whole process, which I think was incredibly powerful. If anyone hasn't looked at it, just kind of look at the exec summary, right? It's all there. But that process was really, it was that classic process of let's stock take where we are. And really understand what's happening. Let's have a look systemically at what the impacts are of the tourism industry and where it reaches. Have a look at those climate scenarios and went with what now I would call the classic 3 scenarios, which I think have adapted somewhat now, even a couple of years on. But those classic scenarios, and then looking at what the consequences could be. Under each scenario, there's like a dozen key sort of indicators. And then a roadmap for things that need to start to change. But even today, I think I look at that roadmap now and say, still not robust enough. It was a start, but we need to look at that. At THL, we still use those scenarios. We still use that report on an annual basis in conjunction with other indicators around the world to help us understand what's coming and what's next.
It's such a challenge, even in the work of those scenarios being good and helpful. But it's such a fluid and dynamic thing that we're trying to model here. I think luckily our advances in AI and technology will help us in those spaces. But again, it is super hard, and it is to a degree a bit of crystal balling. How do you kind of plan for such uncertainty and volatility in some of these spaces? And how does THL kind of navigate the uncertainty, and especially when you are planning so far into the future, like I know you are? Yeah.
So what's interesting, so first of all, let's go back to that CRD kind of situation. One of the real challenges there, when you're put into, you have to put it into a box and have to get it so right, again, it pulls things back, because exactly as you just said, there are so many variables. And for a company like THL, jurisdictions, types of vehicles, types of scenarios, what the options could be, what the progress of change will be from our OEMs that are producing the vehicles base for us. All of those variables mean your range of scenarios is impossible to manage. So exactly as you say, hugely volatile, really wide range of scenarios. So what do you do? Fundamentally for us, you look at what is the core, and the core for us is our largest emissions are in the vehicles, and how do we work on changing that dramatically? So trial and test, stay in the front, keep going, invest R&D money in it, and just really look to change and bring as much of the industry alongside as you possibly can. That's been a key sort of aspect of what we've done over the years, whether it be the Te Aki Promise work that we're engaged in from the start, whether it be the tourism sustainability commitment with TI, just really try and bring the industry along. Then in our controllables, and for us that's the scope 1 and scope 2, you go hard. Like no excuse, right? And they make really strong business sense over and over again.
Nice.
So absolutely no excuse on those, and just keep going as much as you can and try and bring people along.
And I know for you, there have been moments where you've got to a point where you'd do more if you could, but the system's also, working against you. And yeah, there are things that are outside of your control. And I think, again, that's where having a really open and collaborative, as much as possible, approach to some of these challenges, when you alone can't sustainable your way out of some of this.
Well, so that's an interesting one, right? So let's sort of devil's advocate some of this. So, okay, you could say, okay, Grant, look, I hear you. I know you might think I'm a good person and try and do the right thing. But you could also go, what a load of crap. You're not a technology taker. You should just move out of ICE vehicles and do something else.
Go into yurts.
Exactly. Go into something completely different. The reality for us is we if we do that, we're just leaving a space for somebody else to do stuff that may not be trying to improve things to the degree that we are. I think that's step number 1 with us. So we've come to that realization. If we were just going to exit it all and try and do something completely different, doesn't actually better the situation for the world. Actually being really good at what we're doing and trying to advance that is actually point number 1. And trying to change the technology, rather than being a technology taker, we are absolutely in that space. So we are investing on a global basis and trying to partner with more and more people to keep that moving and keep that advancing. So measure us on our outcomes, absolutely, but also measure us on how we're trying to move things along and whether we've actually got genuine effort going into stuff. And if we can prove that and show that, then let's try and move that whole industry forward.
What's it like having offices or areas in different countries when you think about what you can and can't do and control and manage, and you've grown astronomically in the very short time that you've worked at THL.
Good call. Yeah, let's call it a short time. And the concept of natural capital, it's a short time.
Yeah.
So that's a really interesting point. So the reality is New Zealand actually is in a pretty good space in a lot of respects. Not where we need to be, fully acknowledged, but in the tourism industry, relative to the markets that we operate in, we're in a good space. We worked with one of our international trade partners to really try and get some advancements in North America. And we spoke to Destination Canada and what they're doing from both an Indigenous perspective, sustainability perspective, community perspective. And we've got some real good progress, and we've started and built into some initiatives. We tried that in the USA and got a flat, interesting, not a priority for us, not where we are at the moment. Love what you're doing. Sorry, see you later. Australia is sort of in between, and there's actually Tourism Australia's advanced tremendously in the last 5 or 6 years. So different conversations in different places. What we try and do is take any IP that's been developed here in New Zealand, Te Aki Promise, for example, and just share, educate, and just try and really see that evolve in different jurisdictions. That's sort of the key on that side of things. When you talk about infrastructure, you're right, we struggle around the world. You know this better than me, but one of our team that lives in Switzerland said to me recently, and they've got a hybrid, they've got an ICE, they're a bit of a engine nut, but they're saying it's now literally more expensive to charge an electric vehicle than it is to fill an ICE in Switzerland.
Yikes.
Which there's system changes that are still we're struggling with.
So true. Were there any interesting lessons from Canada that you want to share or talk about? Because I think we often talk about what we're doing here. I certainly would be very interested to know what they're doing in Canada.
So it depends on the different aspects that you're talking about. When you think about natural capital, I think inherently it's actually really deeply embedded in Canadian tourism and the environmental. When you think about the Yukon, and you think about, we've had an excellent individual that's a bit of a brand ambassador who really started a lot of tours and tourism in the Yukon a number of decades ago. When you look at those broader, deeper experiences, it's been built off a really strong base. So there's a lot of really positive work, I think, that occurs from that perspective. So it seems to me, from my perspective, more embedded at a natural level in Canada. Then very different when you talk about the cities and where Vancouver's at and a whole lot of different issues. So I think that marriage there will be interesting over time. I think we're probably at a slightly different starting point, but at a better position overall in New Zealand. And we're spread more nicely in New Zealand in terms of our awareness, knowledge, and the actions that are occurring.
Because I think sometimes, I've got some friends in Canada that when I post some of our scenery, they're like, oh my God, it's like looking at home. We've got so much in common. Yeah. Do you think that because I think one of the benefits of New Zealand, like one of the strengths that we really have is as being a small country, there's no one in the tourism industry that you couldn't get a hold of in 30 seconds or less.
100%. New Zealand is such a strength of ours, without a doubt. We're small, connected. We're a touring destination, which means that people want to get across the country. That's a key part of our tourism offer. As a consequence of that, we're a very connected industry. Long tail, lots of businesses, lots of family businesses and small operators, but they're trying to do the right thing as well. Have they got the financial resource to do some of the things that would make a real difference? It's a question that we've got to really ask and answer. Are we operating in the industry a whole lot of businesses that probably have an existential threat relative to what's happening in the environment? Probably. Are we opening up ourselves to those conversations enough? Probably not. When you know the stats better than me, but look at what's happened with our glaciers over time. The last 2 decades, what are we talking about? 40-odd% reduction in totalised volume in our glaciers. The stat I heard with that's about 37% of Lake Taupo.
And I know, and we know that landscape is a big draw for why people come to New Zealand is our scenery. I was at the tourism summit, and I was listening to a panel before I was speaking, and it had 3 sort of international sort of geopolitical experts talking, and one of them was talking about at the moment and for the foreseeable future, with some political uncertainty and sort of some more dangerous threats, some people don't want to go too far from home. We are far from everywhere. So we need to give people a really good reason to come. And if we know one of the big reasons that they come for is our landscapes or our glaciers, it is a real economic imperative that we think about how we're going to,
100%.
maintain that resilience for this economy, this industry.
Well, do you think about that? You think about, and it was just before that tourism adaptation plan, Cyclone Gabriel, and you think about, I'm lucky to have some connection with Coromandel, and you think about how long Whitianga and Whangamata in that area was essentially not completely cut off, because you could obviously go the other way around, but made a huge economic impact. And if both access points were cut off, that's a whole economy that is so reliant on tourism. And again, how do we adapt? How do we make them more resilient? Do we have the money to invest in the infrastructure that actually supports that, given the path that we're already on? I doubt it, given the balance sheet situations of most countries, including New Zealand. So we should be having bigger, deeper conversations about all of that. Do we just put our head in the sand and say, well, we'll manage it as it comes? Or are we actually going to front up to the fact that there's areas of New Zealand that are deeply embedded in tourism today that probably aren't going to be in decades to come? And we should just be honest about it. We should help people from a community perspective to look to see how that community changes, but we shouldn't just ignore it and hope that something else changes.
One of the things that I talked about at the tourism summit, I really wanted to leave the audience, which was a mix of small to large operators, with something tangible rather than just me telling them this, albeit profoundly interesting, I'm sure, concepts, but like, well, so what now? What kind of? And even in the process of me thinking about that, there was only so much any individual organisation can do itself when we're talking about systems of nature and regions. So, the advice that I gave to that room was you need to think about it in two ways. You do need to think about it in terms of what are the natural assets that you rely on or are dependent on, and how you impact them. But you also really need to think, regionally and co-invest regionally, and think about, how do we do that together? Again, that must be a challenge and a benefit for you and THL in having a really diverse portfolio, but knowing you kind of do need to look at things regionally too.
Oh, absolutely. The collaborative aspect of being able to work with the different regions is a real benefit of New Zealand, and very different to other aspects around the world. It's a lot harder in larger countries, where a large tourism's our second largest export earner, and I think it will be back to number one within a few years.
Nice.
And I also think that's a good thing.
Well, yeah, and I'm keen to talk about that. I'm keen to talk about the tension between
numbers, volume, impact. And,
totally, yeah.
So let's come back to that, because you mentioned the tourism summit, and I have heard a parable that you used, which I think resonated massively when thinking about natural capital and how we think about the future. I actually think the listeners of this podcast deserve to hear that from you.
Are you talking about the last resort?
The last resort. The last resort. Tell me the last resort story.
Well, I think one of the things that we struggle with, we talked a little bit at the beginning around the sort of psychology of humans, is if you can't understand or connect with it, it's really hard to do anything about it. And how do we kind of lift some of that ecological literacy? So I wanted to tell a parable or a story that I knew the audience could relate to. So I had talked to them about a bunch of other stuff, but I got to the point where I said, if we can't change how we think about taking from nature, and we assume that she's going to giving us her services and her assets for free, we will end up checking into the last resort. And then I tell a story of you enter reception and you see Natalie there ready to check you in, and you recognise her big smile because service recognises service.
Yep.
Really wanting to lean into the things that I know that they know and do every day. Natalie asks, "Are you checking in?" "Yes, please. I booked a room with a view of a native forest." "Oh," Natalie winces. "I'm so sorry. That wing's actually been disestablished. The previous owners wanted something more productive. So we've got some pines or some paddocks. Would you prefer mooing or a potential erosion?" You wince. "Oh, neither of those sound great. What about a room with a view of a clean river?" "Oh, that's on short supply as well at the moment. We've got a great fountain. It's part of our human footprint collection."
Right.
And I sort of go on through some of the different options that you might like, and just really wanting to demonstrate that the things that we sell, we might end up not being able to sell at the last resort. So in the end, you ask, "Well, what can I get?" And Natalie says, "Well, we can upgrade you, but it is going to be a bit of an investment," acknowledging that the upgrade comes with, the need to invest a little bit more. "So we can upgrade you with a bit of an investment into the restoration suite, but if you do that, Nature's room service is legendary."
Brilliant.
And it was very well received. They got it immediately.
100%.
Yeah.
100%. So I really love that, because I think, again, what you're doing is you're creating greater awareness, you're educating, and you're making it really clear what needs to be different, right? What needs to be different is that we need to be honest about where that's heading. We need to have a clear plan, the restoration suite, and we have to acknowledge that it's a different investment. So I think you've captured all of that in that one story, and I think, without a doubt, people will be walking away thinking about that, because it just resonates. It sits. They've been at a summit, they've sheep that have gone through the dip, they've shaken everything off. I think the last resort will stay and help people really think about it.
I hope so. I think one of the truths about it and the reality behind the story that I'm trying to tell, which is that it is going to require an investment. Ideally, framing that as an investment, not
not a cost.
Not a cost.
Yeah.
But I can also appreciate that that is a hard thing to prioritize, and I think about the immediate challenges that we're facing today versus the challenges that could be coming, like the last resort. And even what comes to mind for me is that that World Economic Forum infographic that you see where it says like the top two the risks in the next 2 years, AI, a breakdown of democracy, social unrest, all of these things. In the next 10 years, most of the risks are environmental, and often in that breakdown of natural resources or ecosystem services, not just climate change. So I can appreciate it's a really big challenge and tension to try and invest in something that's not the thing right in front of you.
Well, you know that great cartoon that was out just around COVID with a small crisis, COVID coming over as a wave.
I do remember that.
And then everybody actually ignoring the fact that the big wave coming over the top of everyone is the climate and the environmental issue. Something you said reminded me of, we both know Rob Campbell, former chair of THL and a very strong sustainability advocate in New Zealand. He had a really good way of framing it a few years ago, and talked about the fact that when you value a business, you tend to, the primary valuation methodology is a discounted cash flow, right? And in the discounted cash flow, you're looking at all the earnings over the year, and then you have a terminal year, and that's really important, which basically says this business goes on forever. And because it is a going concern. And fundamentally, most of the value in DCF sit in that terminal year. And if we actually think about the fact that if we're not investing in the environment, if we're not investing in the renewal, then chop that off.
Totally.
And all of a sudden, your whole valuation of businesses changes, right? So that recognition, I think, is really important. I think it is there in tourism.
Same.
We've just got to be clearer about defining it and defining where there are those existential threats that are real to different businesses, and creating that medium and long-term plan to change and adapt for it. That's the whole point. These are called adaptation plans because that's what we need to do, not panic plans.
If I gave you a magic wand that you could, that you could wave to change something that you think would radically kind of either change the trajectory that we're on, or change people's mindsets, or what do you think is the biggest change that we need to get more investment into the natural assets, not just nature, not conservation, our natural assets, which underpin the whole economy? What do you think is the big barrier that if you had a magic wand you could wave away?
So there are, I guess, this would create a huge amount of debate all over the place, right?
Awesome.
A whole lot of subjective views. I actually think there are a number of things that you could say and do. I actually think the fundamental systemic difference that is required in New Zealand is that there needs to be a national tourism organisation that understands and looks at the tourism system. And when you look at that tourism system, the vast majority of tourism attractions in New Zealand require a concession with the Department of Conservation. There is a connection to nature. 90+% of tourism businesses say they want to do something positive in tourism, ... We're not connected on that. We're not connected between regional tourism organisations. We're not connected on a product base. We're not connected on a funding base. We're not connected. We're a very disconnected industry from that is just controlled by so many different parts. If you bring together in government, and there are different ministers who have done this, all the CEs of departments that connect into tourism, it's a big room.
I bet. Massive.
And you might bring them together at some point, but then they've got to go back to their day jobs. And I think having a clear tourism product-based, environment-based, system-based organisation that with a very clear mandate around developing the system and bringing all those bits together and really focusing on designing it effectively, then I think you'd get policy decisions that are better. I think you get investment decisions that are better. I think you get better guidance. It's not Tourism New Zealand. It's not MB. And it's not even TIA as the industry body. They should all have parts to play in that organisation. And that's when we did the Tourism Futures Task Force during sort of the COVID period, that was the most powerful example that I've seen and been part of those different aspects of the industry coming together. And that's what created some real amazing stuff. So that to me is actually one thing that just would move so many things forward. Still have frustrations with government and funding and other bits and pieces, but at least you'd have consistency. You'd be able to pull the different umpteen plans off the shelf that have been done and have one organisation guiding it and taking it forward.
I'm smiling because it also sounds a little bit like the Aotearoa Circle.
Oh, yeah.
And I can hear Dad when you speak, saying, if we can't bring, especially government and private sector, together, we need it all on the same table.
Yeah. That's exactly, you're right. You're right. It's exactly the same thing. Maybe it comes through that. The work that the Aotearoa Circle has done in tourism has actually been incredibly powerful. It's been rich, it's been powerful, it's been something that's really connected the industry. But it's not everything.
Yeah, totally. And I can imagine Joe is in the background, probably writing what next for the circle in tourism. Thinking about how we might be able to do some more in that space. But I do think circle aside, what is the public-private partnerships that we need to see to sort of move things forward, especially since the things that we're talking about are so systemic.
Well, you've just said it. It is those broader partnerships. The Department of Conservation is critical, and I think with again some very dedicated people with some great intentions. It has struggled to really connect the tourism piece with it.
Yeah, I agree.
And there's a lot of work to do in that. So they've got to be at the table and they've got to be a key part of anything.
Well, that kind of brings us a little bit back to the tension of growth in tourism and the protection of natural assets. Because one of the things that, I think, DOC is the Department of Conservation. Personally, I'd love a rebrand. The Department of Natural Assets, or the Department of Growth for Nature. We love the word growth, So conservation so implies, the conserving of what's left. Like we can't. So I'd love a rebrand, but maybe that's something we could work on the side.
No. Well, so the Conservation Act needs a rewrite, so that we're far more focused on where we need to be today. I think that could form part of it. And I think getting some really different skill sets in around the table on the way that connects in, I think would be excellent. I mean, again, they're in a tough position, right? I don't want to bag
totally
Department of Conservation and the intentions and the people within that, because I think they work incredibly hard. But they're dealing with an axe that's ancient. They're dealing with a funding crisis, as so many places are, and they're dealing with a massive amount of change that they're trying to address at the same time. But I think you're right. Let's move the ambition to the positive. Let's move the story to the positive.
Yeah, I want a growth strategy for our natural assets, not a conservation, sort of mindset. That'd probably be my wand if I could wave one.
So I sidetracked before, but we were talking about that element of growth and what growth means. Interested in your views first, and I'll throw mine in. So what do you, when people go, tourism shouldn't be growing, we've got enough people here and it's just impacting the environment and it's net negative, so stop, which is a view that's out there, and those that saying, well, we desperately need it for the economy and ... Where do you sit, and what's your view on that?
My view would be with the right sort of tools and accounting, we could make whatever it is be whatever it needs to be. And I think if we can quantify the impact that humans have, whether they're tourists or not, to a degree, on our natural assets and ensure that that capital is not being sucked off the shelf. Totally. And if it is, that there is the appropriate, feedback loop going back into it, because there's no reality where we're not impacting nature and the natural assets. We'd all have to just go.
Yeah.
So I think the problem isn't, how many are coming. It's kind of an arbitrary number. It's what are they doing when they get here? How are we measuring the impact of that, and then investing to ensure that those things remain for the economic benefit of our amazing country,
and to improve the overall mauri, right?
Totally.
And which we can. So I'm 100% in line with what you're saying. I do agree. The measurement's key, so that we can. And there's the financial side of how you do that. There's the time side. There's the overall resource and where that all sits physically across the country. And so tourism flows. Particular locations that may be over tourism, but that's really minor in New Zealand. So how do we do that? Then the thing which I think I get accused of being a little bit too esoteric with this, but the thing that I think is really powerful is we've got a fantastic story to tell. We've got a fantastic way that we can educate people, and having people experience New Zealand at its best and experience that regenerative aspect, and taking that back to the rest of the world, I actually think has a multiplier effect that is way more powerful than anything else. And we've got to remember, in terms of an individual's impact, let's park, just for a moment, let's park the airline emissions, because that's a whole different debate for a different day. But an individual's impact, they are having an impact somewhere in the world. So if they're having that impact in New Zealand rather than somewhere else, and we're adding to them as an individual, we're adding to their knowledge, their experience, and building them as a person to be a better individual globally. That's a great ambition. And it's a place we can be. And it's a place that I think Te Aki and the Te Aki Promise has a real strong place to play in the future as well.
I'd really like, and I'm sure the technology isn't far away, to be able to model. And again, I think that the individual and the number is somewhat arbitrary, but what would the implications be to the tourism industry or to our economy if one of the stocks of capital or assets we had got to a point where it wasn't able to service its customers, especially acknowledging that one asset services a whole number, especially in tourism. What would the economic implications of that be? Because again, I think money talks, and we live in a capitalist society, and we're not going to change that anytime soon. So why don't we should use and leverage that for the benefit of.
Again, couldn't agree more. So again, Department of Conservation and concessions and how they engage and acknowledge the capital model that businesses operate under, I think, is a really key point. So it's not just about going, our concessions are going to increase by 300% and that's going to fund stuff. That's not what it's about in my mind. It's about a genuine understanding of what the give and take is, what capital is employed, and how that capital might need to be different in the future, and what that provides as a return. So if a business with its business outcomes can have a concession for an area, and part of that concession is that it is being far more restorative and regenerative and actually making a difference, refeeding the shelves, then that's a good thing. So let's get the framework right. Let's get, as you say, let's get the measurements right to create the behaviours that we want. And business will make that happen.
I agree. The market will do what the market does, supply and demand.
100%.
I do think one of the challenges is, and this is actually was a metaphor I've used as well, is that we talk about restocking the shelves, but nature isn't a shop, and so it is kind of it is harder to get her to. That's not true. She can restore herself very well if we get out of the way, but it is a bit harder to buy ecology, especially when it gets to a point of no return. And I think about there are some farmers around the world who ignored the declining bee population and are now by hand pollinating because you can't buy the bees back. So I guess my concern is like, what would we need to get the urgency to know that there are certain things we need to really, do sooner rather than later, because there is a point of no return in some areas. And we look out the window and New Zealand looks beautiful. Under the surface, there's some stuff happening that's quite harder to see. And I think we can sometimes get distracted by big weather events and, climate. Big weather event is like cutting an artery, but some of that nature decline is like 1,000 paper cuts until you're kind of bleeding to death.
Yeah, that's a really interesting way of thinking about it. So my response to that, and this might, again, be controversial to some degree, is I think relative to other industries, tourism's actually on the better side of all of that, and in fact can actually have really low impact, but be deeply engaged in the environment. And as such, I would actually be saying, so therefore, from an economic perspective, let's focus on that. Now, you think about some of the current government's goals of doubling GDP, doubling export earnings. Then when you look at tourism, we've got infrastructure that already exists that we can leverage. So we're not impacting the environment from that perspective. We've got something that we've got incredibly low market share on a global basis, around 0.8%. So not even 1% market share. So we've got scope and opportunity. So the cost on the environment and the cost and leverage opportunity is significant. So and I'm not taking a dig at other industries, but if to increase kiwi fruit, more packing houses, more ... So my answer to that would be, let's leverage something like tourism that can get the same and better outcomes, but isn't creating those cuts.
Well, when I think about it, tourism's almost on the front line. They've got front row seat to things. When nature declines, they are seeing it. They're really seeing it. So I think, I appreciate not wanting to dog other industries, but, do you have a message for other industries, or, a hope for some other leaders in terms of how are they thinking about these shared assets?
So let's dive off some of the esoteric and into some practicals and some simple things around that. So accommodation's a really interesting one. So I don't understand, it's very, again, a little bit esoteric, but I don't understand why every farm in New Zealand doesn't have, you talked about yurts, doesn't have 20 high quality yurts in beautiful parts of their farm that are easily accessible, that distribute the economic benefit of tourism more regionally, that are low cost and low infrastructure based in terms of creating from an accommodation perspective, and add to those broader experiences. It's not taking away from Auckland City escapes and experiences. It's not taking away from Queenstown. It's adding to in a low impact, brilliantly environmentally friendly, awesome experience-based kind of a way. That room at the last resort that customer wanted, it's there across all our farms in New Zealand. So same with in viticulture as well. Winery experiences, and we just got all these experiences that we can leverage into that tourism experience as well. And I'll probably be biased and say they should all go in motorhome and parked up beautifully. But that leverages what we are.
Yeah. And we do hear that the more connected or the more natural experiences you have, the better able you are to care about what does or doesn't happen to it.
Yeah.
We've talked a little bit recently about infrastructure. I'm interested to know about how you're thinking about leveraging, if at all, natural infrastructure alongside some of your infrastructure, or thinking about the resilience of your infrastructure and what role natural infrastructure might play in that. Is that something that has come up for THL much?
So there are two sort of broad aspects. One is when you think of infrastructure in nature, and we get back to that point of roads and access. So roads and access are a really interesting one, and how we think about that is in a very challenged way, to be honest, because we do probably leave that in government's camp at the moment. And I think there are some questions and things that need to be answered there. But from an operator perspective, you sort of go, we're just going to have to work around stuff.
Such an interesting challenge I hadn't thought of, because that is critical to the business that you
100%.
provide, and you've got little control over it.
No control at all. What's interesting, though, as an aside, and again, being around the world, people are far more adaptable today than what they've been. And I think this is an interesting one, because when we have wildfires in Canada, for example, which is a regular occurrence, if you went back to pre-COVID, it would stop bookings, right? People go, there's fires in Canada, not booking. Now it's, I obviously won't go to where the fire is, I'll go somewhere else.
No way.
So the level of resilience is much, much higher. The ability to adapt is much, much higher. So I think the ability to change tourism flows is actually, again, a lot higher than what it's been historically. I'll sidetrack onto a digital story in a second.
Cool.
So given that, I think, again, those areas of vulnerability are where we've got to have those deep conversations so that we are saying, what is the cost, what is the benefit, how do we move, how do we develop, and how do we go somewhere else so that we can leave those environments to actually restore themselves to a greater extent.
Have I told you my Mexico story?
No.
Again, I know that some of the room has heard it already, so I get apologies. But talking about natural infrastructure, I heard this case study, and I just think it is such a beautiful way of understanding some of the potential here. So there's a strip of resorts that runs up the coast of Mexico somewhere. And in 2017, I think that they had some big storms and a whole lot of sand and water just flooded these, a whole strip of resorts, millions of dollars in damages. And they were like, oh God, what is the insurance policy here that we need? And they worked with Swiss Re and the World Bank. And they determined that the best insurance policy was to restore the coral reef that ran up that coast.
Right.
Because it stops that from happening. The cost of restoring that reef was nothing compared to the cost of the damages of not doing that.
Yeah.
Isn't that the coolest story ever?
100%.
So those resorts all pay an insurance policy into a trust that restores that reef, and anytime there's a storm that damages the reef, the trust is triggered and a whole bunch of divers go out and restore that reef.
So when you, that's fascinating. And when you think about what we were talking about before about the government and systemic nature of tourism, wouldn't it be great, and maybe the Department of Conservation would say, we already do, which maybe, but where there were events, if they were given that authority to really look at what is the systemic changes that could occur here and take that same approach and tourism engaging in that.
Or what's the natural infrastructure needed here?
Yeah.
Because I think, and the force of nature is so massive. So when these events happen, it's massive. The best way to fight fire is often with fire, because the force of nature is also. I think it's a hard one because, they restored that reef after something happened. So now they're putting a seatbelt on, and a lot of the time you put your seatbelt on and nothing happens. And, you're like, oh, did I even need to put the seatbelt on? But the time that you do need it, you're damn pleased that you did. And I think that can be one of the struggles with justifying doing natural infrastructure, because most of the time it actually just seems like a nice, cute thing to do that you should have done. Actually, it can prevent a really hideous car crash.
Ecosystem.
Yeah, it's exactly right. It's something I'm really, interested in and passionate about at the moment. And I can imagine.
Interesting.
Yeah.
There'll be it's a really fascinating piece of work that could occur across New Zealand.
I think so too.
Come back to the digital story that I was going to say about, this is adaptation and customer flows. So this is something that THL did a number of years ago now, but it's still really relevant. When freedom camping was a real issue, and so we took some AI-based cameras to some freedom camping sites that were very remote, and obviously trained them to tell the difference between a sheep and a camper van, white fluffy thing versus a large, really big sheep. And then we started saying, okay, when this is getting full, we need to tell people. But we went 200 kilometres back. And so we essentially drew the circle and we watched the patterns and said, okay, who's going where? All right, now these people that have done this and this and are heading this way, they're most likely to be heading here. So we just sent them a proactive communication. So just a push notification going, hey, if you were heading here, that's actually getting full. We suggest here and here and here. 90% success rate at moving people.
Wow.
Which that's the thing that we don't understand in New Zealand when we go Tongariro crossings full and ... Well, it's not about somebody tuning up and seeing the "we're full" sign. It's about understanding what the patterns are and proactively influencing those patterns with nothing more than information.
That's
we don't have to put dollars to it. We don't have to force them and tell them. You just information. People will respond.
That's very cool. And again, if you knew that an asset was getting too depleted, how do you proactively say, we've got a better something for you right now while this? Yeah, that's cool.
So take your part of the understanding the ecosystem and the impacts. Take your point of measurement and getting that better, and then away we go. Now, people say to me, "Oh, that's a cute story about influencing people, but how do you get everybody on board and do it?" We are absolutely at a point where I don't think anyone, 90% of people, would be more than happy having an app, a New Zealand app. It should be the Te Aki Promise. And when you come to New Zealand, you download the Te Aki Promise. Part of that is you're engaging with our story, you're engaging with Aotearoa, you're engaging with those we care principles that sit within Te Aki, and ... track information, guide, support. And don't monetize it, don't need to monetize it. It's just there as your support as you're journeying through New Zealand.
Cool.
And what we could get out of that is huge.
We've covered a lot of ground today, Grant. We have talked about, everything from the tensions between more tourists and the impact and natural capital. We talked about your journey, we talked about everything. What is the thing that you'd like our listeners to take from the conversation that we've had today? Whether that is a hope that you have for them and what they're doing, or a challenge to them, or a change in mindset. What's the one thing based on the conversation that we've had that you hope really sticks?
Yeah. So I think it's a connected one, and it is the point that clearly I'll be seen as being biased, but I genuinely believe, maybe to a fault, I don't know, that tourism can and does benefit people's lives. And therefore, let's take that opportunity. Let's do all the things you've said. Let's measure, let's reinvest, everything else. But if we just have that mindset that if we are consciously focused on doing it right, it's just got a multiplier effect. It's that positive concentric circle. And if we can just get people saying tourism's a good thing, it engages with people's hearts, it engages with people's cultural heritage, it engages with the environment, and we do that in the right way, then let's just put those pieces in place to make that happen and embrace it.
And the dividends will pay.
They will. We need all those other things around it, without a doubt, but just let's keep that at the heart.
Yeah, I agree. Nice one. Thank you so much for joining us today, and thank you so much to Grant. Follow along. We've got other conversations that you should listen to, so subscribe, tell a friend, tell your mum, and I'll see you on the next one.